Hello, Empathy Heroes. It is me again. Me always, in your ear holes and in your hearts. Known Wells, creator and host of the You Me Empathy podcast. Thanks for being here. Today's chat on episode 7 of the show, I am talking to Eric Zimmer, the host of the One You Feed podcast, a brilliant podcast you should absolutely be listening to. Eric is a joyously inspiring human, and we explore depression together on this episode. A topic, a state of being, a mental illness that so many of us struggle with, including both Eric and I. I also have to admit that I was a little nervous in this episode. Eric, being a hero of mine, I just had a lot of nerves coming into it, and I think during, and so I stumbled a bit, but Eric was very gracious and kind, and he seemed to be okay with it. So I'm just going to take his word for it, because he is a vulnerable, honest, transparent human. And so yeah, there you go. Okay, the disclaimer for the show is that the You Me Empathy podcast is for informational and or entertainment purposes only, and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And so that's the disclaimer. And I guess I will leave you with this. Thank you so much for listening. You guys are so tender-hearted. Hugs to you. And enjoy this episode with Eric Zimmer.
La la la, you, me, empathy, yeah, la la la.
Hey guys, it's me real quick. I wanted to call out an iTunes review that I just found so lovely, and it made my week. This is from username Swaggy Reviews. Quote, "This is one of the bravest podcasts out there, not just because of the intimate nature of people sharing their struggles, but because doing so requires a particular bold leap of faith in people's compassion. Thank you, Known, for providing us a space for sharing and for practicing empathy. Maybe empathy can be contagious." End quote. You guys, that is the best. My heart swells to hear that. And so thank you, Swaggy Reviews. And guess what? Your iTunes review of You Me Empathy could be read on this show as well. So go please leave us reviews. It helps out the show. It's very simple. It takes a couple of minutes. Just speak from your heart. And leaving reviews gets us, potentially higher in the ratings and, potentially more listeners of the show. And that's what we want. We want to reach more people with this empathy and compassion and mental health awareness. So thank you, Swaggy Reviews, for doing that. I'll also say that, guess what, you guys? You Me Empathy is on Patreon now. Woohoo! So if you go to Patreon, patreon.com/You Me Empathy, links in the show notes, I am basically putting it out there. I will, if you support me on various reward levels on an ongoing basis, then you get some fun rewards like the cool new You Me Empathy stickers. If you check us out on Twitter and Instagram at You Me Empathy, you can check out those. There's a reward tier for guest spots on You Me Empathy, and a bunch of other just fun stuff. So go check that out, patreon.com/You Me Empathy. I really appreciate your support. This is a lot of work to do, and I love you. Okay, that's all I'll say. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 7 of You Me Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of Yumi Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our neuroses, our mental illnesses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire conversation and insight so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being human. Yumi Empathy is a safe place, a conversation between friends, a place to inspire the empathy and beauty in all of us. Today, in episode 7, I'm grateful to continue this empathy journey on the topic of depression with storyteller, inspirational coach and speaker, and good wolf feeder, Eric Zimmer. Hello, Eric.
Good morning, Nan. That's quite an introduction.
Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much for being on the show. Before we got recording, I was just mentioning to you that I'm a huge fan of your podcast, The One You Feed, and you're sort of an inspiration for me and for this show. And so I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That's very kind.
Of course. You're very welcome. So before we get into your origin story and the topic of depression, let's do a quick check-in. How are you feeling this week, sir?
This week as a whole, I wouldn't say it's been my best week for a variety of different reasons. Maybe 50%. Just a little bit more aimless than I like to be, a little bit more symptoms of depression, I suppose. This week, found out that a dog that I love has cancer and is probably not going to make it very long. So that's certainly been contributing. It's cold as all get out here in Columbus, Ohio. It's so unpleasant. You don't want to go outside. I think that's been contributing. So I'm all right. I just got done saying I was great at the intro, but now you've got me down to all right. So I'll probably be weeping in another 10 minutes of your interrogation.
Yeah, I the hard-hitting questions here on Yumi Empathy. Well, I'm very sorry to hear about the dog. That hits me in the deep part of my heart because I'm a huge dog lover, as most of these listeners know, and that's so tough.
It really is. Yeah, we lost another one also not more than about 5 months ago. So
wow.
It's been a tough dog year. I moved out of where I was living, so I don't live with the dogs anymore. So I miss them a lot. And now, yeah, it's been a tough dog year. I love them, and they're so important. But yeah, it's not been the best dog year.
I'm very sorry to hear that. I always say that dog ownership is, or any really pet ownership is sort of a tragic affair. We love them so deeply. We aspire to be like the dogs, living in the present and in the moment, but their lives are so short. And then, they also suffer from the illnesses sometimes that humans suffer from and go early. And that's just so tragic.
It is. I think about that because I hear a lot of people, say, well, after I lost that one, I can't go through that again. And I guess it reminds me of that old phrase, right? Better to have loved and lost than not loved at all. And if I look at the overall, pleasure to pain ratio, it's like 95% pleasure and like 5% pain. That 5% pain is pretty acute, but all worth it to me.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective to have because they do bring us so much joy while they're here with us, for sure. You mentioned you live in Columbus. I live in Southern California, just south of LA, and I work my day job. I work for a little agency called Winning Edits, and we're all a distributed team, so we're all in different parts of the country. And my boss, the creator of Winning Edits, lives in Columbus.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What is Winning Edits?
Winning Edits is, the general term is a creative agency. We're basically a startup. We've been around for a couple of years, and there's 8 of us now, maybe 9 of us. I think 8 of us. We work with brands and companies and authors on editorial strategy, manuscript publishing and strategy, brand development, content strategy. We've helped authors sort of launch books and podcasts and, all that stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. But anyways, my boss lives in Columbus, and I went to Columbus once. It's a lovely town, but I have not been there in January. So
yeah, it is a lovely place. I love it here. But yeah, January can be awful. I mean, it's pretty much been hovering in the single digits for, feels like, a couple weeks now. So it gets tiresome.
Wowzers. And, when it's that cold, I'd imagine, for me, one of my coping skills or one of my coping mechanisms to make me feel better when I am feeling lousy and depressed is to be outside. How do you deal with that when you're dealing with, 5 degrees outside?
Well, I just don't go outside very much. So yeah, it definitely is. That's part of it. I mean, winters here are challenging, I think, for everybody, but if you have, some degree of depression or mood disorder, it can be particularly challenging because the sun doesn't shine very often. That's often the worst part. Mm-hmm. Is just how little sun. And then to your point, I love to be outdoors, being in the woods, being outside, moving is such a big part for me of taking care of myself. And I guess I could be brave enough to bundle up and go do it, but I don't. And so, yeah, you kind of lose that too. It's a little bit of a tricky time of the year, but there's also something to be said for trying to just get in the spirit of kind of like cocooning in, and moving slower and doing less. If you can get in that mindset, it's helpful. It's kind of the old idea of trying to turn whatever challenges you have into benefits. What's the good that you can find in it? And that is the good side of it. Yeah, no, and there's this thing going around. I'm sure you've heard of it, hygge, or I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Hygge. It's like a Danish term for getting cozy and creating a space in your home or, around yourself that's sort of cozy and calm and comforting. I'd imagine that would help in times like that as well. I'm sure it would. Yeah, I know what that is. I haven't looked at any of it. But yeah, so it's winter. It'll pass. That's the main thing. It'll pass. Yes. I like the seasons. There's something to be said for, I lived in California for a while and I definitely missed the seasons. Yeah. Now, I could do with like 2 weeks of winter. I wish I could change the duration of the seasons a great deal. Spring and fall seem too short. Summer and winter seem too long. I'd like to switch that ratio. Yeah, we should maybe start a Kickstarter. Yes, it might be a good way to raise some money. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit how you're feeling this week. For me, I'll just mention real quick, just a couple of days ago on Friday, as we're recording this, was the launch of Yumi Empathy. And I'm feeling a bit of relief from that. I had quite a bit of buildup of anxiety and just, feeling about how are people going to perceive this? How are they going to take it? And so far the feedback has been great and positive and just nice. So I'm feeling a bit of relief this week. Yes. Congratulations on getting it launched. I know what an effort that is. Yeah, thank you. It was, a few months of sort of heavy sort of prep work and a couple of years of sort of just thinking on it. It's sort of consuming my brain. So it's finally here and I'm very excited. Okay. Eric, why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you're here on this podcast or on this earth, whatever you want, however you want to take that. Well, I'm on the podcast because you invited me, and it seemed like a great thing to do. I'm fairly old at this point, so my origin story is long. But what I mainly do now is I focus on the podcast, although there are some other things I do to make money also, which I'm trying to transition out of. But I mainly focus on the One You Feed show and the things that are associated with that. I do a lot of coaching with people. We're working on some online course development, things like that. And the show is just a show where we talk with a variety of different people, authors and thought leaders and scientists and spiritual teachers and whoever else, really about what it means to live a good life. So that's most of what I do. My background has been largely in software startup companies and then leading some very large software projects for very large organizations. So kind of one extreme to the other. In my professional career, I started and ran a solar energy company for about 4 years. And I'm a recovering alcoholic addict. Was a heroin addict a long time ago. And as you mentioned, deal with depression, which I largely have pretty well managed, but I wouldn't say that it's, a thing that's in the past. And I don't know if it ever is in certain cases. I don't know. And some of it I think is temperament, right? I think some of what we call depression might just be temperament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I just mentioned this to the listeners real quick. Yeah. Go listen to the One You Feed. It's exceptionally inspiring. I particularly like, most recent episode I listened to, I was sort of going through your archive, and I was really fond of your Matthew Quick episodes. He's a guy that is very open and vulnerable, and your sort of chemistry is really top notch.
Yeah, he's a great guy. His books are outstanding. He's a fiction writer. For those of you that don't know, Silver Linings Playbook is probably his most famous book, which was turned into a pretty famous movie. But yeah, he's a wonderful guy. We've had him on 3 times.
Yeah,
I just love talking with him.
Yeah, he's a good one. So let's talk about depression. I reached out to on Facebook and Twitter and sort of asked people how they describe depression. And I've heard you describe depression as sort of like, combating an emotional flu.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you still sort of ascribe to? And what does that mean to you?
Well, I think I use the emotional flu as an analogy for how I mainly cope and deal with depression. I don't know that I would describe depression as like a flu, except in that particular analogy. I mean, the analogy that I'm making is that a lot of times when people get depressed, they tend to question everything about their lives. Because depression for me and for a lot of people, I think, means suddenly everything that matters to you suddenly doesn't matter. It doesn't have any meaning anymore. And so the conclusion that we can jump to is that something is really wrong with my life as a whole. And so now I need to think about changing all of it. And there's a time and a place for that. But if you know that you deal with depression, if you know that it kind of comes and it goes, then rearranging your life every time it hits is not a very useful thing, and it causes a lot more pain to depression. If suddenly you think that there's a really big problem, then that can be very painful. And so the analogy I use is kind of like a flu or a cold. When we get a flu or a cold, we feel like crap. We don't want to do anything. Our just mental state is off. And so, but we know, like, all right, I've got a cold or a flu, so you know what? I'm just going to ride this out. It'll get a little bit better. I'm going to take good care of myself during this period, and then I'll emerge. It doesn't throw us into an existential crisis when we have a cold. And so for me, depression is similar, that I don't want to go into an existential crisis every time my mood dips for a period of time. So that's kind of what I mean by that analogy. Mm-hmm. Now, I also think that, like anything, you can take that analogy too far. We should be looking at our lives and saying what's going on in our lives, and it is some degree the way we're living contributing to our depression. And if so, we should be looking at that and dealing with it the best we can. But I don't think, like I said, for me, depression seems to be cyclical to some degree. The idea of the flu or cold has helped me to just get through it a little bit more gracefully, I think, and not add additional pain on top of it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the analogy because it helps me, and I think it would help others to position depression. Because for me, sometimes depression is such a big thing. It's such a big idea. It's maybe hard to wrap our brain around. It's, maybe we don't even know where to start with it or where to begin to combat it in whatever, and sort of making the analogy of the emotional flu, and it helps to put a little structure around it or frame it a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And depression is a huge idea. It's very difficult to talk about because I don't think it's a thing exactly. Like, I don't know that I believe like there is this one condition that's called depression and we can isolate it. Like, you can isolate a cancer. You can say, all right, this cancer happens because this particular cell starts to replicate out of control and blah, blah, blah. And then you can look at what the effects are in the rest of your body from that thing. Depression is very, very different than that. It is, I think of it much more as a syndrome, in that there are lots and lots of causes, lots of conditions, the variables, there's so many of them, and the potential treatments, there's so many different ones. So that's the other thing about depression that's so challenging, is it's not really a thing that we can put our finger on. Now, it's nice to be able to think that we could do that. And it's nice to be able to say, okay, here is some, to be able to diagnose something as depression. And in certain cases, clinical depression to a particular extreme is easier to pin down. But for a lot of us, it gets to be very difficult to say, well, am I depressed? Am I sad? Do I not feel good? Like, it's just a very nebulous monster. And so, to your point with the flu, I just learned that about myself. And hopefully for some people that's useful. For other people, it might not be a useful approach or not. I just have learned over the years what tends to work best for me.
Right. Yeah, and I said in a previous episode of You Me Empathy, we as humans, we try naturally, I think, we want to come up with simple sort of solutions to things. This is the box of depression. These are the associated symptoms. These are the causes. And I think that's a natural sort of approach to just the overwhelming nature of the things in our world. We want to put things in boxes, right? But as you're pointing out aptly, depression isn't one of those things. It's a lot harder. So combating it or finding sort of ways to cope with it can become, I don't know, a little bit, it's a harder journey. It's a tougher journey, I think. And before we get into sort of how we've experienced it ourselves, I want to just mention a few of the responses that I got from people who, friends on Facebook and whatnot, who answer the question, how do you describe depression? And my friend Jeff said, a loss of curiosity.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's actually my biggest.
Yeah.
That is actually my biggest indicator. I can tell that I'm off when I can't think of a song I want to listen to. I can't think of a book I want to read, because I'm normally voracious in that way. Like, my main thing is like, I don't have enough time to read all this. I don't have enough time to learn all this, explore all this. It's a curiosity for life. I think it's one of my biggest traits. And I do notice that's the big one for me with depression, is that goes away. And that's when I'm like, okay, something's going on here that I'm not where I normally am, because my curiosity is disappearing.
Yeah.
That's a great description.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think I experience the same thing when I think just being curious about life and the world around us is a sort of fuel for living. It's a wondrous fuel for living. And I think when that is sort of softened or muted by illness, it can be a very jarring experience.
Yeah. Depression is a real Do we swear on your show or not?
Oh, yes. All language is valid, Eric.
All right. Well, depression is a bitch for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And it's very difficult to pin it down to one thing. There are varying degrees of it for sure. But I do think most people, if you ask them about what depression is, they will point to some degree of the things that normally matter to me just don't matter. Mm-hmm. That may be the most simple summation of how I think you can delineate depression from other things. If you are in a place where you can think of something and you're like, that would make me feel a lot better, it may not be depression. You may be unhappy with the conditions of your life. When I am truly depressed, there's almost nothing that I can think of. I'm like, well, if I just had that, then it's a deeper, more, I've used the word existential a couple times, but it's a deeper thing than that for me when I'm depressed. I'm not like, well, if I just had 10,000 more listeners to the show, I'd be happy. That's just being discontented with the state of things, which is a very different thing in my mind than being depressed.
Yes. Yeah, I was reading, what's his name? Dr. Hold on. Cut this part out now.
Jekyll and Hyde?
Yes, Dr. Alex Korb, Korb, and he was just describing depression as, we sometimes want to sort of relate sadness to depression, or we provide the same sort of definition to each of those things, but to Alex, they're very different, and one of the analogies he gave, which I particularly just found very powerful, he says, quote, "For example, I like to think of depression as a traffic jam. When you enter a traffic jam, sometimes there's an accident. The cars are stopped and you sit there and wait. And you don't know how long the traffic jam is going to be. But for most people, it was just a little stoppage on their way. But for people with depression, it's something that their brain just can't quite escape. They can try and try, but their brain is stuck in the pattern of activity that just drags along, and the traffic jam just continues."
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it. We had him on the show. Boy, it's been a long time ago, but we did have him on at one point. He's great.
Oh, nice. Yeah, no, I particularly like what he's a neuroscientist, and he sort of gets into all the sort of the brain chemistry and stuff, which I kind of dig.
Yeah. And I can't remember the quote. I sort of paraphrased it, and I can't remember the person who said it, but it's something about like, in sadness, everything has meaning, right? And in depression, nothing has meaning. And I think that that's a real way to look at that. And I do think they're very, very different things. Mm-hmm. Now, I do think that sadness can morph itself into depression, but I do think depression is very fundamentally different than being sad. Like, my dog is dying, right? Like that, I am very sad about that. And when he dies, I am going to be very, very sad about that. But that's a very different experience for me than depression.
Right.
Depression would be my inability to particularly care that he lives or dies, which sounds terrible, but that's kind of the condition. It's like, well, all right, yeah, okay. It's kind of Eeyore, versus the full expression of true emotion.
Yeah, exactly. So, Eric, when did you first learn that you had depression?
Well, the fact that I listened to the Smiths most of high school should have been my first tip off, but but I didn't put it together at that point. And then I spent my years of like 18 to 25 being a drug addict and an alcoholic, and so I sobered up and had a bunch of different things happen. But the long and short of it was I was probably, 4 years sober maybe. And my ex and I had split up. My son was 2 at the time. She kind of had left me for someone else, and I was completely devastated. And so I dealt with that, and I felt like I kind of worked through it, but I just still felt stuck. And I hit this point where I was like, all right, I'm doing everything that I know I'm supposed to do to take care of myself. So I am I'm exercising, I'm meditating, I'm eating well. At that point, I was very involved in recovery. I'm going to lots of meetings. I'm doing all of those things. And I still absolutely feel like crap. Like I just feel dead inside all the time. And so that was when I was like, all right, I'm going to go treat this. And when I did, I suddenly noticed a pretty big difference after, a month on the antidepressants. I suddenly was like, all right, well, I'm feeling very different now. And so that, I think, was probably when I first realized it, which was quite some time ago, 15 or 16 years ago, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was the first time that I went, okay, what I have is a condition. If you'd asked me, do I get depressed before that, I would have said sure, but I would have thought of it probably a little bit more in the way we tend to think of it as being sad or melancholic or whatever. I don't think it was till then that I realized what it was and what depression looked like and manifested for me as.
Mm-hmm. And as as you're sort of experiencing this, at that time, what were some of the symptoms you experienced, and how did that impact you at that time?
Well, the symptoms that I experienced then, I think, are a variation on the symptoms I just described, which
Mm-hmm.
was sort of this deadness, this inability to feel very much, the inability to want to do anything. I mean, at that point, it was getting pretty serious. I mean, I was having trouble getting out of bed. I was having trouble going to work. I mean, I was really definitely struggling at a deeper level of depression than what I have dealt with really since I treated it. So I think that was the impact to my life at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Was it was pretty overwhelming. I was just not functioning very well at all. So I think that was the impact at that point. And over the years since then, it flares up and it goes away, and it flares up and it goes away. But the extremes of it are far, far less. But the antidepressant medication has something to do with that. I mean, I think a big part of what it does, for better and for worse, is it narrows the emotional range that I feel.
Sure.
And so you can look at that and go, well, that's terrible, which in some ways I look at and I go, that's terrible. But the flip side of it is that it's far worse for me to be on the other side, because I know that for me, untreated, it sort of took me to a place where I was non-functional. And since I've been taking it, I've been very, I think I'm what you would call very functional. I've been very successful career-wise. I raised a couple kids that have turned out pretty well. While I was doing, full-time jobs, I started and launched a solar energy company. I started and launched a podcast. So I think I'm pretty functional in that regard. And I wasn't at one point. And so I think that, to me, that tells me that I'm mostly managing it pretty well.
That's great. And what do you mind mentioning the medications that you're taking? Are you still taking today?
I am, although I'm about to start another. I think it's only really the second time that I've tried it. I'm going to try and go off of the medications just to kind of see, like, all right, what do I look like now without those medicines? It's the right time in my life for a variety of reasons, but there's just it's just the right time. I have a lot of support. I'm in a very good place. My life looks very different than it did at different points. So I'm about to try and wean off of those with the help of a psychiatrist who really knows how to do this stuff. It's what she specializes in. But I take Wellbutrin and Cymbalta.
Okay. I was taking Prozac for a while, and I've sort of recently, with the support of a psychiatrist, weaned off of it, and I am not on any prescription medication currently, but I do take, which helps. It has seemed to help. It helps sort of calm me a bit. It helps with anxiety as well. Hemp oil, CBD oil.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I've heard about that. I haven't really experienced or tried it yet. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's I get it through this company called Charlotte's Web. They're based out of Colorado. It's really high quality stuff. I've never really been a weed smoker, so it doesn't contain sort of the psychoactive elements of that. It's just the sort of the body calm part of the plant.
Yep.
Yeah, and I just the Prozac was making me feel a bit manic and like really, really sort of high pitches of anxiety, which just didn't work for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for whatever reason, and I've been on the medications for as long as I have because I just tolerate them incredibly well. I have no, besides, like I said, a certain potential narrowing of the emotional range, which I also think is endemic to my personality. It's hard to tweeze the two apart. I just have not had what I would consider side effects from them. So that's kind of why it's something that has worked. And for a variety of reasons, there were good reasons for me. Well, I guess, we're being vulnerable. So I was in a pretty challenged marriage for a long time. And then that ended, but we continued to live together for about 3 years to try and work with the kids. And so I was like, when that's over and I'm out of that situation, I'm going to give another run at this. But during that period, I was like, everything's working well. The kids are doing well. Everything's working well. I just don't want to mess with anything right now. Because I had tried at one point to wean off the medications and it didn't go very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. You'd want to sort of, let's maintain the status quo. Things seem to be going okay. I don't want to mess this up, which could have potential impacts on, the people in my life.
Yep. Yeah. And I've been, like I said, I've got a pretty, very, what's the word for it? I have a lot going on. Like I said, I do a lot of things close to, pretty much a full-time job in order to support all the things that I have, as well as creating a podcast. And so I was like, I just don't have time for, 2 months of readjustment right now to keep a podcast coming out every week and doing all the different things I do. So it's sort of that, yeah, if it's not broken, why fix it, or whatever that phrase is.
Sure. That's the phrase that works. Can you maybe describe a little bit of, you mentioned early on, you found sort of structure and support in, going to a psychiatrist, getting, the medication that works for you. Can you maybe describe some, as you were sort of coming into your own and sort of learning more about depression, some of the support systems you had, otherwise?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to look at depression. I'm one of those people that believes that you need to treat it, it's such a cliche word, but holistically, right? Like walking into a doctor's office and getting a pill can help, right? But for me, that's just scratching the very surface of it, right? And so for me, the treating my depression is very much, I very much think of it as a physical thing. Now, there's a mental component to it, but to me, it's exercise and eating well are the primary ways that I treat my depression. I think those are absolutely essential for me. Medicine or not, if I'm not exercising somewhat regularly, I just start to feel like crap, and mostly mentally is what I mean.
Yeah.
And so that's a big one. But I started this thing, God, it's been a long time now. When I look back on it, sometimes I'm like, have I been tracking this that long? But I came up with this idea, it's probably been a decade ago, right? Where I was like, well, there are activities that I can take in my life that I know contribute to my well-being. They help me deal with depression. They just help me across the board. And so I've got a list of them. And my goal isn't to do all of them every day. And basically what I'm looking at over time is, am I doing enough of the things on this list? And when I'm doing enough of that things on that list on a pretty consistent basis, I'm in pretty good shape. And if I find myself struggling, I can often look back at the previous week or 2 weeks and go, okay, well, I haven't been doing very good with those things. So that's really the support that I have. I was in therapy early on, when I was diagnosed with depression. I haven't done that in a long time. I mean, a big part of my treatment is the podcast. I mean, I started the show really as a way to keep myself in a better mental frame of reference. I'm one of those people that left unmoored, or unanchored, I don't drift in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
I drift in a decidedly negative direction in a bunch of ways. And so the podcast for me was really sort of an anchoring, like, all right, I want to keep these concepts and these ideas front of mind for me. Like, I need to be focused on these things. They need to be a day-to-day part of my life that I pay attention to. And the podcast was one of the reasons. Was it made me have to do that. I was like, well, I'm going to have to read a book a week. I'm going to record a show. I'm going to talk to people. It became part of an intricate part of the fabric of my life. And that's been a huge help. I mean, it worked in the way I thought it would. Yeah.
That's so profound. And it's so good to hear, because I would say that starting Yumi Empathy is, I have a similar sort of intent in keeping myself sort of focused on the good things and therapy and sort of embracing empathy and vulnerability as a means to grow and to learn. And, because I like you, Eric, left, as you put it, unmoored, can tend to go to some really dark places. And when I'm having conversations with people like yourself, I'm reminded of, you're telling me, just this very inspiring story about how, you've managed depression, and that helps me, and that brings me sort of insight and joy into my own life, and just the fact that can potentially help others as well. On top of that, it's a cyclical, maybe somewhat self-interested, but ultimately very sort of therapeutic process that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a great thing for me, and I'm in the process of trying to transition, as I mentioned, from doing other things, other work, to this full time, and that's really kind of, that we'll see how that goes. But I would do it even if that wasn't the case. I would love to do it more because I think it's really what I do well, but I would continue to do this show, all the effort, all that stuff, even in light of that, because of the benefit I think that it brings me.
Totally. Yeah, same. Agreed. I'm going to go back again to, I'm thinking of just my childhood and the ways in which sort of I operated, and just to help the listeners out, and you, Eric, the thing I did as a child was I created what I called my heart guard, and it was just a means to sort of protect myself from the quote unquote sort of trauma that I felt I was experiencing. And sort of fast forward into adulthood into my late teens, early 20s, I went through a very traumatic bout of depression and sort of almost died and developed an eating disorder. And, fast forward again, I'm in my mid 30s now. That part of me is still very much a strong part of me. And it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is, sorry, my train of thought is struggling here. What I'm saying is, I'll just be open. I recently had a conversation. Sorry, Eric. I recently had a conversation with my mother, and she had, I was describing to her how I have depression and anxiety, and I struggle emotionally, and I've had suicidal thoughts. And I was being very open with my mother, and her response was, "Oh, I always thought you were just a sensitive boy. You were just such a happy, sensitive boy." And to me, that speaks to a stigma that we have, not wanting to see those around us struggling. I mean, I empathize with that perspective, but also like a inability to want to see the whole person, and I think sort of inability to want to be open and vulnerable. And I don't know what the point I'm making is, but I'm wondering if you can relate to that at all.
Sure. I mean, I think if I were to maybe give you your own question, is to what degree does our childhood experiences, or what degree do our childhood experiences or my childhood experiences have to do with depression and the person I am today? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is absolutely. I mean, our childhood experiences, I think, are very, very formative. I mean, there's certain people that think like we're kind of, by 6, our basic temperament and all that is pretty well formed by our childhood experiences. And there's probably some truth to that. I spent a lot of time when I was going through the first bout of depression, when I started going on medicine, I did a lot of sort of looking back at childhood stuff. I had a therapist, and that was her whole 9 yards, sort of the classic, almost inner child type thing. And so I spent a lot of time looking at that stuff. And for sure, it plays a role. And I don't think anybody's parents are perfect. There's different degrees of better or worse. I mean, I look at my son. He just left, for college this year. He's 18 years old. No, he's 19 years old. He seems to be doing pretty well, but I'm almost certain that at some point in his life, he's going to realize what I did. What things did my dad do that screwed me up? Mm-hmm. And I think I've tried to be a pretty conscious parent, but we all, I have limitations. We all have limitations. So it's an interesting thing. I think it is useful to understand the things that formed the way we are. So I think going back and looking at that stuff can be very useful to understand ourselves. I think self-understanding is a very, very useful thing. Self-awareness can be very, very helpful done in the right way. And looking at how you were raised and what your parents were like and what were the belief systems and what were the ways to act and not act, all that contributes greatly. So I think that work is important and it's useful, and I think we can get stuck in it also. I think that's the danger, is we get stuck there. Yeah. And I think that's what what we have to watch for, is learn what we can from it and then try and move away from it. I think there's a certain part of if we look at our overall who we are, it's made up of a lot of different things. And where we are at a point in our life, some of those things we can change, and others of those things I don't think we have a lot of say over, right? Some part of it is probably genetic, and that you're just not going to do a lot with that. There's a lot of positive psychology studies out there that show that, somewhere from 50 to 60% of who we are and the way we are and our ability to influence our mood is sort of it's already set. You're not going to do anything with it. It's genetic, or it's the way you were raised, or it's whatever. And then there's about another 40 to 50% that we do have a lot of control over. And so I think that in a lot of cases, our childhood and all that, there are things to learn. We can learn our patterns, but a lot of that, to me, I feel like falls into that category, that I can't change. I certainly can't change the way I was as a child. I certainly can't change the way I was raised. So what can I learn from that to pull into my life? What can I look at? But beyond that, I've found it much more useful to move on to, okay, now what? All right, I know that stuff. I've explored it, and how much exploration of that is, who knows, right? I won't even pretend to know the right answer. It's probably different for everybody. So that was an important thing for me to do, but I wanted to get away from being stuck in it. I didn't want to blame my parents. My mom, I look at my mom and I see my depression. I know where I get it. My mom has it. She suffers from it badly. She didn't know it when she was raising us. She had no idea that that's what was going on, but I can look at it and go, that had a big impact. Yeah. Right. And I look at my mom and my mother has tried suicide. My mother has challenges. And so I look at it and I go, well, I come by this honestly, right? Like I got it, from her, a combination probably of genetics and the way I was raised. And so I pull what I can that's useful out of that. And then I try and just move past it and focus on what are the things that I can do that benefit me and that can help with my depression today. And so I think it's, of course, our childhood experiences have a ton to do with who we are, but you can find people who had two very similar childhoods and turn out very, very differently. Yeah. And so there's a whole lot more going on than that, but it is a component for sure.
Yeah, no, I thank you for sort of helping me sort of explain what I was rambling on about. That's precisely a thing that I'm dealing with in therapy is I do struggle sometimes with, the pull of the need to want to make my family sort of realize how they impacted me, A, and B, see who I really am. I feel, but I think to your point, I think that maybe is aligned with holding on to that stuff maybe a little bit too strongly and recognizing that, hey, I need to, pull from these experiences, know that they are part of who I am, but also focus on the stuff that I can control.
Yeah. And I don't know the right answer, and I don't claim to have sorted all that stuff out. Like, well, I did that and now it's all fine.
Sure.
I don't know. And maybe, I think there are different families are challenging, right? I mean, there's that old, phrase that everybody's heard from Ram Dass, if you think you're enlightened, go visit your family. And so I think that's, we all deal with, there are challenges. I mean, I look at some families and I'm like, my God, how is that so perfect?
Yeah.
But most of us, that's not been our experience. And so I definitely think it's worth looking at. I definitely think if a closer relationship with your parents is very important to you, then some degree of making peace with that stuff is needed. I also think that it's going to be very difficult to get parents to see the world through our eyes, through our lens. There's so many things that get in the way of that for a parent. I mean, generationally, like just culturally, like the way my parents were and their values are very different than what mine are versus what my kids are. I mean, there is some difference there. I can see it for sure. So that's some of it. And secondly, as a parent, it takes an awful lot to look in the mirror and say, I caused this in my children. I mean, that isn't, I don't know of anything that might be more difficult or more painful. And I say that as being a parent,
right?
To look at my son and go, well, yep, okay, he is in a lot of pain and I caused that, or I had a big piece in that. That's tough. And I don't think in a lot of cases, people aren't capable of doing that. That's not something they can see or understand.
Right. How have you, when you've had those thoughts about your impact on your children, how have you dealt with that? How have you reconciled that? Well,
this is sort of flip, but it's also not. I mean, when you've screwed up as many things over the course of your life as I have, I've gotten pretty good at allowing myself to be human.
Yeah.
So I did the best I could with my son at every step along the way. I know I had the best intentions, and I know I tried as much as I could with him. And I couldn't have done anything. I don't think I could have done better than I did. Now with 2020 hindsight, sure, it's easy to make everything better. But at the time, I was doing the best I could with what I had. And I ultimately think that's what I look back at my parents on. And I go, you know what? They really did the best they could with what they had at that point. I think they wanted to do the best, I think most people do the best they can with what they have at a particular point in time. So for myself, my son right now seems to be doing pretty well. So it's easy to be like, well, I might have not done a couple things right, but look, he's fine. If he spiraled into depression and tried to kill himself, I think I would have a very different check back with me then about how well I accept my failings as a parent, right? I think it would probably be very different.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think some of what allows me to do it is that he's okay right now.
Yeah.
And I do, he seems to have turned out really good in a lot of ways. And so it's easy for me to go, well, maybe I didn't do everything right, but I did enough right. But, I'm smart enough. That sounds egotistical, but to realize that there's a lot of factors that go into the way a child turns out. And some of that has to do with me and some of it doesn't. And, but all the way back to the original question, I, for whatever reason, have gotten pretty good at cutting myself some slack on things that I mess up.
As you should, because as you point out, we do our best with what we have, and we are human. We're fallible.
Yes. Yep. That is, like I joke about it, but I do think it is helpful if you screw a bunch of stuff up and you can be honest enough to look at it and realize it. It helps me to be more compassionate to myself, but it also makes it a whole lot harder for me to hold things against other people. I'm pretty forgiving with people, and I think a lot of that is, some of it's probably just my nature, but some of it is also, I'm like, well, what, people in glass houses, right? So
right. How, you mentioned, obviously the one you feed is a mainstay in your, sort of treatment for your depression and keeping, having these conversations and reading these books. What other types of things do you do today that helps you with depression? And before you answer that, I'll just mention maybe one that helps me a lot is knowing that I'm not alone. Like I have a life partner, Jessica, who's a very empathetic person, very supportive. I have friends who love me and actually want to see me, even if sometimes it's hard for me to see them. And also, it provides me with some comfort to know that there are people out there like yourself, Eric, who also struggle. Yeah, I think knowing you're not alone is fundamental. And if there's anything I feel like I try and do on the show as much as anything is normalize the experience of struggle, because everybody does it from some degree to another, whether it's a great struggle or a minor struggle, but everybody struggles. And, but that's not the culture we live in. That's not really what we show, which is partially why what you're doing is so great, right? You're getting it out there that like you are not alone. And so I think that's a big piece of it. The rest of it is kind of my list of things. Like I said, I could just probably pull the list out, but exercise, eating well are on there. Meditation is on there. Connecting with friends is on there. Being outdoors is on there. Practicing and playing my guitar is on there because it's something I enjoy. Doing a gratitude list is on there. I've got this long list of things that I know are good for me. And I just try and, like I said, an a la carte menu. I'm trying to do as many of them as I can on a regular basis. So those are some of the big ones. Works.
Those are the main ones. Yep. I can't overstress exercise, which I don't know why it's so hard for me still to do. I'm always flummoxed by the fact that exercising can remain a struggle for people.
Sure.
Because I've done it every single time I've done it without fail. Afterwards, I've gone, I'm glad I did that. You would think with that many years and that many repetitions of positive experience, I'd be running to the gym. And I just don't know why that isn't the case. It baffles me. But I mean, I think I know a couple of reasons, but exercise is a really, really big one. It's one of those, such a boring thing. Everybody hates to be told, like, you're not feeling good and you're struggling, go exercise. I'm like, that's not the problem.
Yeah.
But it is partially in a lot of cases. We are very much embodied physical beings. we might not want to be, but we are. And taking care of ourselves physically, exercise, food, sleep, those things are just, I mean, to me, they're the fundamental layer. Like that is the very fundamentals of dealing with emotional challenges. Now, they're not the end of the road by any stretch. I don't mean to say if you exercise and eat well and sleep well, whatever your mental condition will resolve itself, but that's ridiculous. But it is a big part for me and for a lot of people I know of a baseline. That's the baseline, and then we can build on that with lots and lots of other things. But
yes,
yeah. So that's I always feel like I'm somebody's mother. Eat your vegetables, but and it's decidedly unexciting compared to this new esoteric breath work that I learned about from here, or this tapping method, or all the different things that we try and do. But I think sometimes it's just get the fundamentals down and then build from there.
Yeah, the fundamentals are key. I think staying active for me is a big one. During my sort of flu week last week, I couldn't run, and running is a thing I really love to do. And I get, when I'm not doing it, and I'm sort of stuck in this flu coma, I'm not going outside, and that sort of it has this sort of snowball effect. I start convincing myself that I don't even deserve to be outside, to be comforted by the sun, that which gives us life. So yeah, staying active, running. What kinds of things are you doing at the gym? What are your favorite sort of methods of staying active?
It tends to switch over time. Right now, it's a combination of just getting on a treadmill and running for a period of time, and then I've been doing a lot of Pilates.
Nice. Yeah,
which helps my back.
Sure, I can relate to that. I have some arthritis and displacement in my spine, and I just signed up for yoga again, which is very helpful for me. Yeah.
Yep. Yoga seems to, if I'm not doing it right or I'm not careful, seems to make my back worse, which is counterintuitive. And I avoided understanding that for years because I didn't want to think that could be the case. But I have to be very careful with it. Pilates, on the other hand, has been unreservedly wonderful for my back.
Nice. Again, you mentioned gratitude. Gratitude is a big one for me as well. Even, our friend, Dr. Alex Korb mentioned gratitude, and sort of as an example, like, keeping a gratitude journal, when you do that, you're sort of more tangibly reminded of all the sort of the positive aspects of your life, which I find very beneficial.
I think it's definitely useful. The number of, different studies on it and stuff, it definitely helps. The other way I like to frame that up is slightly differently. I tend to think of it sometimes also as an appreciation journal. And the difference there is gratitude. We tend to be like, I am grateful that I have a roof over my head in this freezing cold weather, because there are people outside right now in Columbus who don't. And so I am grateful that I do. Appreciation for me is more about like, what did I appreciate today? What did I enjoy? What things gave me a brief sense of pleasure or well-being? The particularly good cup of coffee, or the way my body felt after running, or a song or a book. And so those are often what I'm looking at. And the other benefit that has is it starts to prime my brain to look for those things. I start to look for, that's going on the list. What am I looking for? And so I think gratitude can be, what we're grateful for, but I also think taking it to very small things can be very, very helpful, because I think it trains us to look for the good things that are in our lives. And I think that's a very big piece of all this. Is Dr. Rick Hansen says, look for the good. This isn't mindless positive thinking, which I rail against often in the show, but that idea of in almost any situation, there are positive and negative things happening. The analogy I always make is I travel a lot. So I walk into a hotel room, and inevitably in every hotel room I've ever been in, there are some things that I really like, and there's something or some things I don't like, or, aren't up to my standard or whatever it would be. And so which of those do I pay attention to? It's not a question of like making up good things or repressing bad things or being positive all the time. It's just like, of the things that are in front of me, which am I going to choose to give my attention to? And so the more that I am conscious of giving those to the good, the better off I am. And it's not my default state. And it's honestly not most humans' default state. Our default state is to look for what's wrong. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but that's the default state. So looking for what's good can be so helpful. And so an appreciation list, kind of going back to that, is a way of training our brain to do that more regularly.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And it's perspective, right? And you're focusing on the good, but you're not, saying, oh, the bad doesn't exist. You're not sort of repressing the bad. That's still a part of it, but you're just choosing to find joy in the good. Yeah.
Yep. It is. I mean, at every moment we are creating our experience via, to a large extent, filtering out what we don't want to see, or our brains are always, there's so much to pay attention to at any given time that the more we can be conscious of how we direct that attention, the better off we are. Mm-hmm. Because that's, like I said, our nature is not to do that as people. Our nature is to focus on the thing that's negative. And right. So it is a matter of directing where our attention goes. And I think that's a lot of, mindfulness is all the rage, and for good reason, right? There's so much wisdom in it. So some of it is just non-judgmentally paying attention to what's in front of us, which would be the definition that Jon Kabat-Zinn gave, kind of maybe the founder of the mindfulness secularized version of it in the West that we have. That's part of it. But I also think that there is an amount of judgment that is useful. And that judgment is, like we said, it's choosing what am I going to focus on at this moment. It's the ability to remain mindful for me of the fact that I am making choices, even when I'm not aware of it, of where I put my attention, what I choose to cultivate, what I choose not to cultivate. I am making those decisions. Most of the time, I'm not aware that I'm making them. And so a big part of mindfulness for me is just to come back to that awareness of like, okay, what's appearing in my brain right now is not the only version of the truth there is. There's lots of other versions that could be there. So if I don't like the one I'm getting, can I look at it differently? Remembering to do that is the hardest part, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, it trains us to pay attention and recognize how things affect us, and having insight into sort of the emotional responses, mental responses that we have to the external world.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a mini episode, I don't know, it's been a few weeks ago, called, I think I might have called it The Greatest Teaching, or I don't know. But I was exploring the idea that, like, I think maybe the fundamental teaching that underlies everything I've learned on the show and everything that's so important is to recognize what we just said, that what's happening to me, my experience, is being created by my brain, and that if I can start to recognize that, I can get some distance from my thoughts. I think the ability to get distance from our thoughts and emotions, or to be able to take different perspectives on what's happening, is probably the most important skill to learn for being happy, particularly if you're one of those people that has a mind that just tends to spit out garbage. Mm-hmm. That is so critical. My mind, again, left unchecked, tends to spit out a bunch of garbage. And so it's so important for me to be able to look at that and go, okay, that narrator in my brain is not necessarily telling the truth. Like, everything that comes out of that inner voice is not true. It's not real. It's not right. It's just one thing. And then being conscious and making a choice of, okay, what do I want to think about? What do I want to focus on? How can I avoid fallen into the same habitual traps. For some people, again, I don't think this is as important because their brain is generally somewhat benevolent, right? But mine just doesn't tend to be, and I think a lot of people's aren't. And so, but we believe our brains completely. We think that I am having this thought, as if that thought comes from something, I, that exists, that has some truth to it. And if you sit down and meditate, the first thing you'll realize if you look at it is that you, at least the part of you that you consider to be conscious, is not thinking these thoughts are coming completely unbidden. You are not controlling what pops into the brain as you sit there. It just pops up. And so recognizing that, and then so being able to step back from that, meditation is basically, that is the exercise, right? Stepping back from those thoughts. Being able to do that in real life is so critical. If we can do that, we can just sort of stop the madness of the narrator that describes our life. We can start to sort of say, well, wait a minute, like, is that really true? Or I don't know. We can question and get some distance from that. And I think that's the start of most true spiritual and mental health progress, is that being able to get some distance and take perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. We each have, to use a literary reference or a literary term, we each have this unreliable narrator in our heads.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
I'll probably steal that. That's awesome.
Please. Okay, so as we start to wrap up the show, a segment that we've been doing is to talk about maybe an empathy hero or two in our lives. These are people who embrace empathy wholeheartedly, people we know personally, people we're inspired by, dead or alive, fictional or real. Do you want to mention maybe an empathy hero or two, Eric?
Wow, that's a good one. I am stumped.
You want me to start?
Sure.
So, this is episode 7, and I haven't mentioned her yet as an empathy hero, which may get me into trouble. But my wife, Jessica. My life partner, as I call her, critter bug, she is the type of human who cares so deeply about humans, and she's the type, we go to a party and she's an extrovert, I'm an introvert, and she wants to be a part of every conversation, and more importantly, she wants to make sure everyone is having a lovely time, and this sort of perspective that she has, this personality trait that she has, sort of serves her. She's an English professor at the community college level, and she has just such a deep yearning to reach her students, to make to ensure her students are getting the best out of her class that they can, and that they succeed. And that's so inspiring to me. So Jessica is my empathy hero.
Well, I'm going to avoid your mistake of listing my significant other seventh on the list. And I will list mine. Ginny, who's my girlfriend, is probably also one of the most empathetic people I know, almost to the point at times of being detrimental to her own well-being. She just feels other people's experiences so strongly, and cares so deeply for them, and recognizes their pain and challenges, that she's my empathy hero.
Awesome. Yeah, she sounds amazing. I can relate to the taking it a little bit too far where it's affecting you sort of physically. Those people are the people that we need in our lives, for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I don't Yeah, and I don't think that, like all of us, I think our greatest strengths can be our greatest weaknesses taken too far. So,
Indeed.
and we all do that at some point. We all take our superpower too far sometimes, and it causes us trouble.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yep.
As Uncle Ben said. Okay, Eric, before we close it out, would you please maybe remind the listeners where they can connect with you and listen to your podcast and all of that loveliness?
Yeah, oneyoufeed.net. So oneyoufeed.net. So it's all spelled out. Oneyoufeed.net. You can find me. You can find the podcast. You can find our social media accounts. Blah, blah, blah. It's all there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being on the show, Eric. I really appreciate it. And it was a delight.
Thank you, Noah. I really enjoyed it also a great deal. It was a fun conversation. And best of luck to you in the work that you are doing. It's important.
Thank you. I think it's still new, and it feels like I have a lot of learning to do and progression ahead of me, which is exciting.
That is exciting.
Yeah, it is. That's why we're here, right?
That's right. And that's the positive approach to look at it. Instead of like, I'm not doing very good, you can be like, I can get better.
Indeed. And to close it out, I will just say to you listeners, I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.